Hi, I'm Andrew from the Anti-War Committee, and I'm here to talk a little bit about sanctions today, and particularly in the case of Venezuela. When U.S. mainstream news media even bothers to cover Venezuela at all, it's usually portrayed as America's villain in Latin America. The media has endlessly parroted Obama's absurd 2015 declaration that Venezuela poses an, I quote, "a unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security and foreign policy of the United States." We're told that former President Hugo Chavez and current President Nicolas Maduro are left-wing dictators, mismanaging the country's economy, and that poverty and human rights abuses abound. But the reporters writing these stories somehow never seem to know about the U.S.-led sanctions that have had a crippling impact on the country's economy, or about the 6 coup attempts in the last 20 years that have been aided by the United States. They also don't seem to know about the massively popular Chavista movement that put Maduro and Chavez in the presidential rules to begin with. And all of this changes the narrative quite a bit. The U.S. media can say what it likes, but the facts tell a different story. A story of many successes in the face of severe hardship, and much of that hardship imposed by the United States. It's long been difficult, or even impossible, for Venezuela to export oil to fund its development, or to import food and seed stock to build its agricultural system and feed its people. And this is entirely due to U.S. sanctions. Sanctions are an act of war, economic war. And they are intended to kill and to induce deadly levels of poverty. One of the so-called facts that the U.S. media falls back on when it attacks the Venezuelan government is that Venezuelans are starving en masse, supposedly due to the mismanagement of the country. In reality, despite U.S. sanctions, where Venezuela once imported 80% of its food, it now, thanks to the policies of President Maduro, produces 94% of its own agricultural output and is in fact on track to begin exporting food this year, 2023. That's right. We're also told that Venezuelan living standards have been in precipitous decline ever since Chavez took office, but meanwhile, 4.4 million homes and apartments have been built in Venezuela in 2022 alone, offering cheap or sometimes even free, high-quality, well-built housing to people who had previously been living in shanty towns. And again, this is in spite of U.S. economic warfare. Venezuelan industry has begun to diversify and to expand, and the oil industry is back on track. And these successes have been hard-won. Venezuela's recent development owes a tremendous debt to Alex Saab, a Venezuelan businessman turned diplomat who is currently jailed by the United States and awaiting trial in Miami. That's right, it is shameful. Saab traveled the world as a diplomat for the Maduro government, securing critical industrial and agricultural imports for Venezuela from countries like Iran, which have put Venezuela in the position it is in today. Saab was then kidnapped in Cabo Verde, on the coast of Africa, and extradited to the U.S., where a Miami judge has recently ruled that he does not have diplomatic immunity from prosecution because the U.S. government does not recognize the Maduro government as legitimate. That's right, the U.S. still holds Juan Guaido to be the legitimate president of Venezuela, a man who has little to no political importance in his own country, not to mention little to no popularity. Does this sound like the promotion of democracy to anyone here? No! In the kidnapping and criminal prosecution of Saab, a man who I believe to be a hero to his country, we see U.S. sanctions, the U.S. federal government, and the judiciary system, which is supposed to be independent, working together hand in glove to attack and attempt to destroy Venezuelan democracy and independence. And we here in the U.S. have a duty to fight back against our government's united, concerted attempt to strangle democracy and development around the world. Free Alex Saab! Free Alex Saab! Free Alex Saab! Free Alex Saab! Thank you. I have one quick plug I want to make for an upcoming event. When countries like Venezuela are subject to this level of corporate media deception, one of the best things we can really do as activists here in this country is to go see for ourselves and come back and tell the truth about what is really going on there. And in the spirit of international solidarity, the Anti-War Committee is currently sending 2 of our members, including myself and Drake, who I'm sure many people here know, to Venezuela for the 10-year commemoration of Hugo Chavez's death. So we're going to be meeting with Venezuelan trade unionists, agricultural workers, and community councils, so we can hear firsthand how U.S. Imperialism, U.S. sanctions have impacted their country. We'll then return, and the Anti-War Committee will be doing a series of report-back events. But due to U.S. sanctions, it is very difficult and very expensive to travel to Venezuela. So we're going to be hosting a fundraiser on February 10th, a Valentine's Day themed fundraiser. There'll be drinks, music, food, and I hope that everyone here will come and help us make that project a reality. Thank you.
Hands off Venezuela!
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 Our next speaker is Jay Yates from Twin Cities Coalition for Jamar.
Hello everyone. This past Monday was Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and many of us witnessed the endless parade of performative posts, events, and discussions of legacy from corporations, politicians, and white neoliberals. President Biden himself released a statement from the White House calling on us to continue, quote, building on Dr. King's dream of, quote, redeeming the soul of America. But what redemption is there for a country bankrolling a proxy war with Russia while its own citizens freeze and starve to death in encampments across the country? How is a man who asked in public whether he looked like a, quote, radical socialist with a soft spot for rioters in response to the justified rage of millions of Americans who watched George Floyd's public execution going to preach to us about nonviolent resistance? These are the same people who vilified protesters all summer following the murder of George Floyd, calling us thugs, accusing us of random property damage and violence, telling us that Dr. King would never approve of the destruction of the 3rd Precinct, and so on. While I agree that Dr. King's work left an indelible mark on the civil rights movement and was instrumental in winning some rights and protections for black people, even he acknowledged that violent protests are the natural consequence of inaction in the face of injustice. A riot is the language of the unheard. And while we honor Dr. King's commitment to justice and nonviolence, we must also recognize that there are limits to pacifism. Again, we saw this here in Minneapolis when National Guard were deployed and given authorization to use deadly force against largely unarmed protesters. They worked hand in hand with police to try and intimidate us into silence, all packaged under the guise of public safety. But watching young white men in fatigue standing with semi-automatics outside storefronts made it clear that the safety of the public is secondary to protecting wealth and that they were willing to kill us to do it. If the police are the first line of defense against real change in our country, then the military is the second. It not only backs the police when we challenge the state, but trains and arms them. Since the passage of the 1990 National Defense Authorization Act, the U.S. military has funneled billions of dollars of high-grade equipment such as LRADs, armored vehicles, and weapons as part of the 1033 program. A 2020 study of the most militarized departments in the U.S. found that the year after they received the equipment, civilian killings more than doubled. The researchers also found the records of these transfers to be poorly maintained or missing altogether, with little accountability on how this often deadly weaponry is being used. Between 2006 and 2014, over $1.4 billion worth of equipment was distributed to American police forces. In addition, the popularity of so-called warrior training, the same training used by the IDF to brutalize our comrades in Palestine, has skyrocketed as the U.S. Army veteran Dave Grossman has made his violent killology training available online. In it, Grossman states, the most effective way to stop someone is to fire a bullet into his central nervous system. This is a quote. It is up to God and the paramedics as to whether the man dies. Your job is to stop the deadly threat, and the most effective way to do that is to make the threat die. On average, cops, including MPD, get 168 hours of killology training compared to 9 hours on conflict resolution skills. You cannot refashion an imperialist state into a force for good, because imperialism is an ideology of endless expansion, a constant scramble to control the world's resources to gain capital. It is a machine that feeds on our labor and gives us nothing in return but death. That is why we have to fight against militarization at home and abroad. They are systems that depend on each other to maintain the status quo, and it is critical that the future of policing be in the hands of the working class, in the hands of the black and brown communities that have been ravaged by unchecked police violence for decades. We are fighting to establish democratic community-controlled police so that we can actually sever the weapons pipeline between police and the military and keep our communities safe from police violence. Unlike some people who promise that they're banning these practices and then don't actually enforce that in the police department. Under CPAC, we can create the space necessary to rebuild public safety that works for the majority, not just the ruling class. A system that does not rely on brutality or incarceration to halt the struggle for justice. Now is the time to take power into our own hands. Say no to militarized police and yes to community control. And for updates on this fight, you can text TCC for J to 612-453-3152 or visit tcc4j.net to find out how you can help make CPAC a reality. Now I'm going to lead you in a chant that many of you have probably heard before, but you're going to respond community control to whatever I say. When MPD kills on patrol, how do we stop them?
Community control.
When MPD kills on patrol, how do we stop them?
Community control.
When MPD kills on patrol, how do we stop them?
Community control.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. That was a great speech, and the reason that we are here and that we celebrate Martin Luther King's real legacy. So next on the docket is Mike Madden. He is part of the Veterans for Peace and the Twin Cities Assange Defense, another great speaker, and a wonderful chant at the end, so stay tuned.
You know what hockey players do when they're ready to fight?
What?
They throw down their gloves.
I think we're ready to fight, but it's too cold to throw down our gloves, so we'll pretend.
Hi, everybody. I brought my teleprompter again. I don't have to tell anybody here that we're witnessing a proxy war in Ukraine. Russia is fighting the United States and NATO. We supply the weapons, Ukrainians do the dying. Early on, President Biden said he was not going to provide any offensive weapons to Ukraine that would escalate the war. But now, that is exactly what he's doing. He's supplying Ukraine with artillery and missiles that are increasingly sophisticated and have longer and longer range. First howitzers, then HIMARS, now Patriot missiles. He's sending armored vehicles that are increasingly lethal. First it was Strykers and Bradleys. Now the NATO allies are debating which country should send tanks. He is training the Ukrainian military, both in the field and here in the United States. He is providing Ukraine with military intelligence, including targeting information. But in the most irresponsible move of all, the United States is supplying Europe with new, more destructive nuclear warheads, the B-61-12 gravity bomb. Shipments began just last December. They will replace nuclear warheads that are currently deployed to Belgium, the Netherlands, Italy, Germany, and Turkey. It is no comfort that the United States will retain launch authority. In his 2022 nuclear posture review, Biden took a giant step backwards from Obama's pledge to, quote, seek the peace and security of a world without nuclear weapons, end quote. Advocates for nuclear disarmament have long pushed for a sole purpose policy. That is, one which states that U.S. nuclear weapons exist only for nuclear deterrence. Candidate Biden pledged to adopt such a policy, but instead has rejected sole purpose in his nuclear posture review, saying it would, quote, result in an unacceptable level of risk. In other words, when it comes to threats posed to the United States, whether real or perceived, whether conventional or nuclear, first use is not forsworn and all options are on the table. This is insanity. I'm here today to tell my government to back off. Stop with the nuclear brinkmanship and stop sending weapons to Ukraine. The United States is clearly a belligerent in this proxy war, and it is putting the entire world at risk. It is folly to root for a military victory by either side in this proxy war. It must end now with negotiated settlement. Key to that settlement is the status of Crimea and the Donbass. I do not care whether Crimea and the Donbass remain a part of Ukraine. I do not care about the sanctity of borders. Borders are too often arbitrary political constructs. I do care about the self-determination of peoples. 9 years ago, the United States orchestrated a coup in Kyiv. Democracy in Ukraine was overthrown. 2 months later, the illegitimate government attacked its own people in the Donbass. Events such as these trigger a right of remedial secession, a choice between limited autonomy, independence, or joining with another state. By peaceful and democratic referendum, the people of Crimea chose to join Russia. That matter is settled. The people of the Donbass also voted in 2014 to separate from Ukraine, though the exact nature of that separation was uncertain. Negotiations produced the Minsk Protocols, an agreement that settled upon limited autonomy. But Washington never supported the Minsk Protocols. Recent statements by Angela Merkel and Petro Poroshenko reveal that Berlin and Kyiv never supported the agreement either. It was just a ruse to buy time for Ukraine to arm itself to retake the Donbass by force of arms. For Washington, it was a cynical opportunity to weaken Russia. The people of the Donbass are the aggrieved party. Their duly elected president, Viktor Yanukovych, was deposed by a hostile foreign power. They were attacked 2 months later by an illegitimate successor government. They suffered an 8-year civil war in which all of the fighting, dying, and destruction occurred on their territory. They are now stuck in the middle of a proxy war in which their interests are subordinated to a geopolitical power struggle. Somehow, the people of eastern Ukraine must be empowered to determine their own fate. It must include those who have been displaced by the war, both those who have fled to the west to escape Russian attacks, and those who have fled to the east to escape the assault by Kyiv. And I call on the United States to butt out now. To butt out completely. It is a self-interested and dishonest broker. It's time to duck, or better yet, flee, when Uncle Sam spreads democracy. It's time to duck, or better yet, flee, when Uncle Sam spreads democracy. It's time to duck, or better yet, flee, when Uncle Sam spreads democracy. It's time to duck, or better yet, flee, when Uncle Sam spreads democracy. It's time to duck, or better yet, flee, when Uncle Sam spreads democracy. Thanks, everybody.
Not another nickel, not another dime. No more money for U.S. war crimes. Not another nickel, not another dime. No more money for U.S. war crimes. Not another nickel, not another dime.
No more money for U.S. war crimes.
Not another nickel, not another dime.
No more money for U.S. war crimes.
Not another nickel, not another dime.
No more money for U.S. war crimes.
Not another nickel, not another dime.
No more money for U.S. war crimes.
Not another nickel, not another dime.
No more money for U.S. war crimes.
Whose streets?
Our streets.
Whose war?
Their war.
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 Ooh, all right.
Yeah.
Got more speakers?
One more chant.
One more chant. All right. Shit, sorry, no, I'm blanking. All right. Money for jobs and education, not for wars and occupation.
Money for jobs and education, not for wars and occupation.
Money for jobs and education.
Not for wars and occupation.
Money for jobs and education.
Not for wars and occupation.
Money for jobs and education.
Not for wars and occupation.
Money for jobs and education.
Not for wars and occupation.
Money for jobs and education.
Not for wars and occupation.
Money for jobs and education.
Not for wars and occupation.
All right.
I'm down for a fight. I hope you all are too, because the U.S. war machine is not going to give in easily. Speaking of that, the U.S. goes into other countries to destroy them for the U.S.'s resources instead of leaving it up to the people of the country. So the next speaker we have is Urshi. She's from the Anti-War Committee, and she will speak on Palestine. Welcome.
So thank you, Mike, for that speech. Just as the U.S. is ramping up aggression against Russia using Ukraine as a proxy, it is also continuing to fund the displacement and genocide of Palestinians by propping up apartheid Israel. Although it is only the 21st day of 2023, Israel has already killed 17 Palestinians this year. The latest death in this string of Israeli killings was Jawad Bouekna, a Palestinian teacher who Israeli soldiers shot while invading the Palestinian city of Jenin. The U.S. is complicit in these atrocities by giving Israel $3.8 billion of taxpayer money every year. Not another nickel, not another dime. No more money for Israel's crimes. Another nickel, not another dime.
No more money for Israel's crimes.
Not another nickel, not another dime.
No more money for Israel's crimes.
And then our next speaker is Naveen from Movement for a People's Democracy, and they will talk about Iran.
Hello, everybody. Can you all hear me? So recently, the United Nations passed a resolution that would ban Iran off the Commission for the Status of Women and open up an investigation into the country. What is the UN going to investigate on Iran? Can anybody answer that? I mean, it's ridiculous. You know, the same UN that can't prosecute any of the war criminals who took us into Iraq because of the Hague Invasion Act of 2002 wanted to open up an investigation into Iran. I find that just absolutely absurd. If you've been following the news regarding Iran, you would see that there have been protests for 4 months. And it's been a long and stressful 4 months for me, because everybody's getting involved. You know, we have corporations like Balenciaga coming out with statements of woman life freedom. We have Elon Musk opening up his Starlink into Iran, quite literally profiting off the grief and suffering of the Iranian people for trying to speak to their family members outside of the country, getting past the internet censors. This is the same guy who quite literally, when questioned about the coup that he supported in Bolivia against the progressive government of Evo Morales, said, quote unquote, "We will coup whoever we want. Deal with it." The United States does not care about the women of Iran. But this is a no-brainer to anybody who has been following the U.S. empire for the last 20 years in Afghanistan. The same U.S. empire that quite literally destroyed a progressive government for women's liberation in Afghanistan in the 80s and led to the rise of the Taliban government that we see to the day, just to give the country back to the Taliban after 20 years of just fucking invasion and just like stealing resources.
Right.
You want to get involved in Iran's internal problems? There are many problems in Iran. I am very well aware of this. However, how can we need time to solve our own shit. We need to focus on this shit, okay? And nobody else. So, Elon Musk, the Biden saying he's gonna free Iran. The problem is that these assholes quite literally are making our business the business of the entire world when this is our business. And nobody else's fucking business. So, in passing, I will say that if we care about the struggle of the Iranian people in trying to fight for a better government, what we need to do is we need to pressure our government to keep their hands off of Iran and to, quite literally, lift the fucking sanctions that are just destroying the country and making the problems even worse every fucking day. And with that, I'll leave you all with a chant. Hands up, Iran! 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 Thank you.
When Iran is under attack, what do we do?
Stand up, fight back!
When Iran is under attack, what do we do?
Stand up, fight back!
When Iran is under attack, what do we do?
Stand up, fight back!
And then our next speaker is Monique Colors Doty from Black Lives Matter Twin Cities Metro and Black Lives Minnesota.
Thank you, Anti-War Committee. Thank you for having me here and always welcoming your arms. I was offered to do this, so I was like, okay, I'm going to say this. I want to thank the Anti-War Committee for standing by the call for justice for my nephew, Marcus Golden. I thank you for all your support, truly, and working in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. I love you and I value you so much. So I was asked to come and speak. I always say yes to Anti-War Committee. I don't even know what the topic will be. I'm like, okay, I'm here. What are we talking about? Because I'm just going to show up. And I've seen you out. I would have been out more, but I had long COVID. So I was out pretty much spring, summer, fall. But I'll be back out with you more now. And I'm truly thankful for the work that you do, for providing a different narrative from the commercial media that we have. And I thank you for that. I thank you for doing the research and taking the time to find out what's really happening in the other parts of the world and giving a new voice to those who don't have a voice in our commercial media. So thank you for doing that. It's so important because you've enlightened me and educated me. I remember just seeing someone said, oh, Anti-War Committee is protesting such. So I just went over there and I got out and I was like, hey, Kent, what are we protesting? He's like, breaks it down. I'm like, okay, I'm here. Yeah. So thank you for taking the time to inform me because there's so much that I wasn't aware of just because of commercial news. But we are talking about Martin Luther King and his call, to end wars, right? What America has to understand, why America runs around talking about, America first. And there's these right-wing Christians But the word says the first shall be last. And if we put ourselves last and begin to put others first and help others, then that's how we improve the world and the world's conditions. So we need to not be talking about, America has everything it needs to provide for every person that is here. We need to start taxing corporations and the rich. We can provide for everyone here. We can provide for everyone who wants to come here. America wants to stick its nose and spend money because it's what? Military complex, which what brings a lot of money into those stockholders. So they're happy to support war efforts in places we have no business being, but turn their back to the homeless people who are being disrupted in their place where they can only have a tent, right? Our unsheltered people. I misspoke, it's unsheltered. So for our unsheltered people, we have crises right here. And America continues to turn a blind eye to the poor and to people of color in America. And it's a damn shame. It's a damn shame. So I'm so thankful that anti-war committee's out here doing the work, talking about, don't get involved in this war and that war. It's so important because we're raising awareness to people who haven't seen that side of the story, right? And I know Martin Luther King, he used his platform. The need to not be at war and ending the war.